from the economic survey of this year. Now, prices and inflation, which is a successful tightrope walking. Now, the inflation trend reflects a rising phase up to April 2022 when it crested at 7.8%, then holding a pattern at around 7% up to August 2022. Then a decline around 5.7% by December 2022. These are the figures up to December 2022, after which the economic survey is generally finalized. The divergence between a relatively high wholesale price indexed inflation and lower consumer price indexed inflation widened in May 2022, primarily owing to the difference in relative weights of the two indices. Now, regarding international trend, the euro area saw a rate reach 10% in September 2022. The US inflation reached its 40-year high at 9.1% in June 2022. Among emerging markets, Brazil saw a moderation in price trend, while Turkey's inflation was above 80% in 2022. Inflation rate in emerging markets and developing economies increased from 5.9% in 2021 to 9.9% in 2022. Major reasons were the pandemic followed by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, excessive heat in the summers, and uneven rainfall reducing supply and raising prices of major agri products. Now here we can see the difference between the advanced economies and emerging markets and developing economies. Um, Moving on to the domestic retail inflation, headline inflation declined from its peak, that is FY22 witnessed lower CPI combined based retail inflation as compared to FY21. Retail inflation driven by food commodities and sectors like agriculture and allied sectors, vegetable, cereals, milk and spices, housing, textile and pharmaceutical sector. International prices of edible oil surged in FY22 owing to shortfall in global production and an increase in export taxes levied by various countries. Measures to contain inflation in essential food commodities. For cereals, wheat flour exports were prohibited. Export duty of 20% on rice, brown rice, semi milled, and wholly milled rice. For pulses, a buffer stock of pulses have been maintained for price stabilization. Agricultural infrastructure and development cess on masoor was brought down to 0%. Edible oils exempted custom duty and agricultural infrastructure and development cess on yearly imports of 20 lakh metric tons each of crude soybean and sunflower oil. Basic duty on refined palm oil was reduced from 17.5% to 12.5%. Order. Order under the Essential Commodities Act to declare soya meal as an essential commodity for certain period. Stock limits imposed on all edible oils and oil seeds. Rural urban inflation differential has declined. Now, rural inflation has remained above its urban counterpart throughout the current fiscal year, reversing the trend because cooling of inflation is more pronounced for urban inflation. Now, the domestic wholesale price inflation, part of the double-digit inflation in WPI during first half of FY23 could be attributed to food inflation, which stayed at 7.5%. Part of the WPI inflation is imported inflation, examples edible oil, prices of oil, and basic metal. Convergence of WPI and CPI inflation was mainly driven by two factors. Firstly, a cooling of inflation in commodities such as crude oil, iron, aluminium, and cotton led to a lower WPI. Secondly, CPI inflation rose due to an increase in the prices of services. Falling inflationary expectations, businesses and households' inflation expectations have moderated, and recovery of the housing sector after the pandemic. Keeping check on pharmaceutical prices. Now, National Pharmaceutical Pricing Policy of 2012. Key principles of the policies are national list of essential medicines, control of formulation prices, and market based pricing. Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Prayojana, dedicated outlets known as Jan Aushadhi Kendras are opened to provide quality generic medicines at affordable prices. That'll be it for the chapter 5.